The explosions echoed across the scarred landscape of Kepler 442b as 10-year-old Sarah Chen crouched behind a twisted metal barrier. Her small fingers gripped the plasma rifle with practiced ease, the weapon almost as tall as she was. Around her, hardened soldiers twice her age looked to her for orders. It had been this way for 3 years now, ever since the Zephyrian invasion began. Squad 7, advance on my mark, Sarah whispered into her comm unit, her voice carrying an authority that made grown men obey without question. The alien creatures had underestimated humanity, but they had especially underestimated what humans could become when pushed to their breaking point. Sarah had been 7 when the first Zephyrian ships descended from the crimson sky. Her parents had been among the first casualties, vaporized in the initial bombardment of New Geneva Colony. While other children hid in underground shelters, Sarah had picked up a fallen soldier's weapon and fought back. The military had tried to evacuate her, but she refused to leave. Instead, she learned. The young girl absorbed tactical knowledge like a sponge soaking up water. Battle strategies that took military cadets years to master, she understood in days. Her small size became an advantage, allowing her to slip through enemy lines undetected. Her youth meant the aliens often ignored her until it was too late. By age 8, she was leading reconnaissance missions. By 9, she commanded her own unit. Now 3 years into the war, Sarah Chen was the most decorated human soldier in the conflict. The media called her the ghost of Kepler, but to her soldiers, she was simply commander. The weight of command sat strangely on shoulders that should have been carrying school books instead of the fate of humanity. The Zephyrians were insectoid creatures, standing 8 feet tall with chitinous armor and multiple arms that moved with terrifying coordination. They communicated through pheromone signals and fought with a hive mind mentality that made them predictable to Sarah's tactical mind. She had studied their patterns, learned their weaknesses, and turned their own coordination against them. "Mark," Sarah whispered, and chaos erupted. Her soldiers moved like clockwork, each knowing their role in the deadly dance she had choreographed. Plasma fire lit up the battlefield as humans advanced with surgical precision. The aliens had superior technology, but Sarah had given humanity something more valuable: hope. As the smoke cleared, another Zephyrian outpost lay in ruins. Sarah stood among the wreckage, her young face streaked with dirt and determination. Around her, soldiers cheered, but she felt no joy. Victory was just another step toward the larger goal, driving the invaders from human space entirely. That night, in the temporary command post, Sarah studied star charts and troop movements. Her tactical computer displayed hundreds of variables, but her mind processed them all simultaneously. Tomorrow's battle would be different. The aliens were adapting to her strategies, learning from their defeats. She would need to evolve faster than they could. General Martinez, the official military commander, entered her quarters. Though he outranked her officially, he always deferred to her tactical genius. "The morning briefing is ready, Commander," he said, using the title that had become hers through battlefield promotion rather than formal ceremony. Sarah nodded, her young eyes holding the weight of decisions that had saved thousands of lives. She had never known a normal childhood, never attended school, never played games that weren't about life and death. War was all she knew, and she was extraordinarily good at it. The next morning brought news that would change everything. Long-range sensors detected the main Zephyrian fleet retreating toward the edge of the system. After 3 years of brutal conflict, Sarah's relentless campaign had broken their resolve. The aliens were abandoning Kepler 442b. As reports flooded in from across the colony, the reality became clear. Humanity had won. The Zephyrian invasion was over, routed by a child who had never known defeat. Sarah Chen, now 10 years old, had accomplished what seasoned military strategists thought impossible. She had saved her world. But as celebrations erupted around her, Sarah felt something she had never experienced before: uncertainty. War had been her purpose, her identity, her entire existence. Now, with victory achieved, she faced a terrifying question that no amount of tactical training had prepared her for. What was a child soldier supposed to do in peacetime? 6 months after the victory parade, Sarah Chen sat in a sterile classroom surrounded by children her own age for the first time in years. The desk felt foreign beneath her hands, too small and confining after commanding from mobile headquarters. Around her, 11-year-olds giggled about trivial things while she struggled to focus on basic mathematics that seemed pointless compared to calculating missile trajectories. "Sarah, can you solve problem 15? Mrs. Henderson asked, her voice artificially cheerful. The teacher meant well, but Sarah could see the nervousness in her eyes. Everyone knew who she was. The girl who had saved humanity was now expected to learn about fractions and grammar, as if the war had never happened. The problem was simple algebra, child's play compared to the complex logistics she had mastered during the war. Sarah solved it in seconds, but the answer felt hollow. These equations would never save lives or change the course of history. They were just numbers on a page, as meaningless as the childhood she was supposedly reclaiming. During recess, Sarah stood alone by the fence while other children played games she didn't understand. Their laughter sounded strange to her ears, so different from the gallows humor of soldiers. When a boy named Tommy approached and asked if she wanted to play tag, Sarah instinctively analyzed his movement patterns and identified 3 ways to neutralize him, before remembering this was supposed to be fun, not combat. "I don't know how," she admitted, the words feeling foreign on her tongue. Tommy laughed, thinking she was joking. No one believed that the famous war hero didn't know how to play simple children's games. The transition to civilian life was proving more difficult than any battle Sarah had ever fought. The government had assigned her a comfortable apartment in the rebuilt section of New Geneva, but the silence kept her awake at night. She was used to the constant hum of military equipment, the urgent whispers of night watch communications, the weight of responsibility that never lifted. Now there was only quiet, and quiet felt like death. Dr. Elizabeth Warren, the military psychologist assigned to Sarah's case, met with her twice a week. The sessions felt like interrogations, probing questions about trauma and adjustment that Sarah answered with military precision. Yes, she experienced nightmares. No, she didn't feel comfortable around civilians. Yes, she sometimes reached for weapons that weren't there. The doctor took notes and prescribed normalcy as if it were medicine. "You're just a child, Sarah," Dr. Warren said during one session. "You deserve to have a normal life, to make friends, to discover who you are outside of war." But Sarah knew the truth that the adults refused to acknowledge. She wasn't just a child. She had commanded armies, made life and death decisions, held the survival of humanity in her hands. The war had forged her into something beyond normal childhood, and there was no going back to an innocence she had never truly possessed. The media continued to celebrate her as a hero, but their attention felt suffocating. Reporters wanted heartwarming stories about her adjustment to peace, her return to childhood wonder. They didn't want to hear about the crushing boredom, the sense of purposelessness, the way civilian problems seemed trivial after facing extinction. At the grocery store, Sarah watched adults stress over choosing between brands of cereal, while she remembered making decisions that affected the lives of thousands. The disconnect was jarring. These people lived in a world she had saved, but they inhabited it so differently that she felt like an alien visitor trying to understand human behavior. Her former soldiers still contacted her sometimes, checking in with their old commander. They struggled too, transitioning from purpose-driven military life to civilian careers. But they were adults. Society expected them to adapt. Sarah was supposed to somehow become the child she had never been allowed to be. School assignments about what I want to be when I grow up left her staring at blank pages. Other children wrote about becoming doctors, teachers, astronauts. Sarah had already been everything she was meant to be. She had fulfilled her purpose before reaching double digits. The future stretched ahead like an empty battlefield with no enemy to fight. The worst part was the loneliness. Surrounded by people trying to help her adjust, she felt more isolated than she ever had during the war. At least then her soldiers understood her. They shared the burden of survival, the weight of decisions, the clarity of purpose. Now she was trapped in a world of people who smiled and spoke of hope, while she struggled with the crushing weight of having nothing left to accomplish. One evening, while reviewing her homework about the water cycle, Sarah realized that peace was harder than war. In combat, every moment had meaning. Every decision mattered, every day brought new challenges to overcome. Peace was just existence without purpose. And for someone who had defined herself through conflict, existence wasn't enough. As night fell over New Geneva, Sarah stared out her window at the lights of a city rebuilding itself. Somewhere out there, Humanity continued its journey among the stars, expanding, exploring, growing, but she felt left behind, a relic of a war that everyone wanted to forget, including herself. The breaking point came during a school presentation about heroes throughout history. Sarah sat in the back row as her classmates presented their reports on ancient warriors, explorers, and leaders. When her turn arrived, the room fell silent. Everyone expected her to talk about herself, but the words wouldn't come. "I can't do this," Sarah whispered, standing abruptly and walking out of the classroom. The teacher called after her, but she didn't stop. The hallways of Jefferson Elementary felt like a maze designed to trap her in a life that didn't fit. Outside, Sarah found herself running. Her legs carried her through the rebuilt streets of New Geneva, past the memorial park where her parents' names were etched in black stone, past the apartment buildings that housed former refugees. She ran until her lungs burned and her legs gave out, collapsing finally in the ruins of what had once been the military command center. The building had been partially demolished, deemed too damaged for reconstruction. But to Sarah, it felt more like home than anywhere else. Here, among the broken concrete and twisted metal, she could still sense the ghost of her former purpose. The strategic displays were dark, the communication arrays silent, but the memory of command decisions echoed in the empty spaces. General Martinez found her there 3 hours later. He had been searching since the school called, knowing instinctively where she would go. The old soldier understood her better than the therapists and teachers combined. He sat beside her on a chunk of rubble without saying anything, letting the silence stretch between them. "I dream about the war," Sarah finally said, her voice barely audible. "Not nightmares about the violence. I dream about the clarity, the purpose, the feeling that every moment mattered. Then I wake up and remember that I have a spelling test." Martinez nodded. He had seen soldiers struggle with peacetime before, but never someone so young. "The war gave you something most people never find," he said carefully. "A sense of meaning that went beyond yourself. Without it, you feel lost." "Everyone keeps telling me I should be grateful for a normal childhood," Sarah continued. "But I was never normal. I was shaped by necessity, forged by crisis. Taking that away isn't giving me a gift. It's taking away who I am." The conversation that followed changed everything. Martinez listened as Sarah articulated feelings she had been unable to express to therapists and teachers. She didn't want to forget the war or pretend it hadn't happened. She wanted to build on what she had learned, to find new purposes worthy of the skills she had developed. "The galaxy is bigger than one war," Martinez said eventually. "Humanity is expanding into new systems every year. There are challenges out there that need minds like yours." For the first time in months, Sarah felt a spark of interest. "What kind of challenges?" Martinez smiled. "Colony defense, first contact protocols, resource allocation for deep space missions. The military is evolving beyond planet-bound conflicts. We need strategists who can think in 3 dimensions, who understand that the next threats might come from directions we haven't imagined." That evening, Sarah didn't go home to her assigned apartment. Instead, she stayed at the command center ruins talking with Martinez about the future of human expansion into space. He showed her reports on his tablet about new colonies being established, about mysterious signals from distant systems, about the challenges of governing a species spreading across light years. "You're 11 years old," Martinez said as the night deepened. "Most people would say you need to focus on growing up first. But you've already proven that age doesn't determine capability. The question is, what do you want to do with the rest of your life?" Sarah stared up at the stars visible through the broken roof of the command center. Out there, humanity was taking its first tentative steps into a galaxy full of unknowns. New colonies needed protection. New technologies required strategic implementation. New forms of life waited to be encountered. The war against the Zephyrians had been just the beginning of humanity's story among the stars. "I want to prepare humanity for what's coming next," Sarah said, her voice gaining strength for the first time in months. "The Zephyrians won't be the last aliens we encounter. Some might be friendly, but others won't be. Humans need to be ready," Martinez nodded. "Then let's talk about your real education. Not elementary school, but preparing you for the challenges ahead. The military academy has programs for exceptional cases. You could study strategy, xenobiology, interstellar logistics. You could help design humanity's expansion into space." As dawn broke over New Geneva, Sarah felt something she hadn't experienced since the war ended. Hope. Not the false hope of returning to a childhood she had never known, but the real hope of finding new purposes worthy of her abilities. The galaxy was vast and full of challenges that would require everything she had learned and more. The child who had conquered battlefields was ready to conquer the stars themselves. But first she had to convince the adults around her that some children were meant for greater things than playgrounds and spelling tests. Some children were meant to shape the future of humanity itself. The war had ended, but Sarah Chen's real mission was just beginning. The boardroom fell silent as 12-year-old Sarah Chen finished her presentation to the Colonial Defense Committee. Around the polished table sat admirals, politicians, and bureaucrats who had spent decades climbing their respective hierarchies. They stared at the holographic displays she had created, showing strategic vulnerabilities in humanity's expanding colonial network that none of them had considered. The defensive grid around Tau Ceti is completely inadequate, Sarah concluded, her voice steady despite the skeptical faces surrounding her. A coordinated attack on Sectors 7 and 12 would leave 3 million colonists defenseless. We need to redistribute the orbital platforms and establish rapid response protocols. Admiral Chen, no relation despite the shared name, cleared his throat uncomfortably. Miss Chen, while we appreciate your enthusiasm, these matters require extensive experience and proper military education. Perhaps when you're older. When I'm older, those colonists will be dead, Sarah interrupted, her patience finally breaking. For 6 months, she had endured this same condescending attitude from every adult in the military hierarchy. They celebrated her as a war hero in public while dismissing her ideas in private. Age had become their shield against acknowledging her capabilities. Dr. Patricia Reeves, the colonial psychologist, leaned forward with false sympathy. Sarah, you've been through tremendous trauma. It's natural to see threats everywhere, but we can't base policy on the anxieties of a child, even one with your unique background. The word child hit Sarah like a physical blow. She had commanded armies while these people attended committee meetings. She had made decisions under fire while they debated procedures in air-conditioned rooms. Yet her age remained the one argument they used to dismiss everything she said. Show them the Kepler recordings, General Martinez said quietly from his corner of the room. He had been Sarah's only ally in these meetings, but even his support carried limited weight against institutional bias. Sarah activated her tablet, and the room filled with holographic recordings from the Zephyrian War. The committee watched as her younger self coordinated complex battle strategies, directed troop movements across multiple fronts, and adapted to enemy tactics in real time. The footage was undeniable proof of her capabilities. This was 3 years ago, Admiral Stevenson said after the recordings ended. War is different from peacetime planning. The skills don't necessarily transfer, Sarah wanted to scream. These people lived in a bubble of bureaucratic thinking that couldn't comprehend the reality of modern threats. While they debated jurisdiction and proper procedures, humanity's expansion into space was creating vulnerabilities that could destroy entire worlds. After the meeting, Sarah walked through the corridors of Colonial Command feeling more frustrated than she had ever felt during the war. At least then, her enemies had been obvious. Now she faced a more insidious opponent, human prejudice wrapped in concern for her well-being. Her quarters at the military academy were sparse but functional. At 12, she was the youngest student in the institution's history, admitted only after months of political pressure and media attention. The other cadets treated her with a mixture of awe and resentment. She was famous, but she was also a reminder that their years of training meant nothing compared to actual combat experience. That evening, Sarah received an encrypted message on her personal communicator. The source was untraceable, but the content made her blood run cold. Deep space monitoring stations had detected anomalous signals from the Vega system. The patterns were similar to Zephyrian technology, but more sophisticated. Humanity might be facing a new alien threat, and the Colonial Defense Committee was completely unprepared. The message included tactical data that painted a terrifying picture. If the signals represented a hostile force, they would reach human space within 18 months. The colonies Sarah had identified as vulnerable would be the first targets. Millions would die while bureaucrats debated response protocols. Sarah stared at the data streaming across her screens, her mind automatically processing threat assessments and defensive strategies. This was why she couldn't adjust to civilian life. This was why spelling tests and playground games felt meaningless. Humanity needed protection, and she was one of the few people capable of providing it. The next morning, Sarah made a decision that would change everything. Instead of attending her regular classes, she walked into Admiral Chen's office unannounced. His secretary tried to stop her, but Sarah had learned to use her fame as a weapon when necessary. "I know about Vega," she said without preamble, placing her tablet on his desk. The Admiral's face went pale as classified information scrolled across the screen. "You received the same intelligence reports I did. The question is, what are you going to do about it?" Admiral Chen studied the data, his expression growing more troubled with each passing minute. "This information is classified at the highest levels." "How did you—" "That doesn't matter," Sarah interrupted. "What matters is that you've had this intelligence for 2 weeks. And the Colonial Defense Committee is still debating whether to upgrade the orbital platforms around Earth. Meanwhile, the outer colonies are sitting targets." The conversation that followed lasted 3 hours. Sarah presented her analysis of the threat, her assessment of human defensive capabilities, and her recommendations for immediate action. Admiral Chen listened with growing realization that the child before him understood the situation better than his entire staff of experienced officers. "Even if you're right," he said finally, "the committee will never approve major defensive upgrades based on unconfirmed signals. The political climate isn't conducive to military expansion." Sarah leaned back in her chair, feeling the weight of impossible choices. Humanity's expansion into space had created new vulnerabilities, but the very institutions designed to protect them were paralyzed by bureaucracy and prejudice. The adults who should have been preparing for the next threat were too busy protecting their own authority to listen to uncomfortable truths. "Then we do it without their approval," Sarah said quietly. "There are ways to prepare defenses that don't require committee votes. We use training exercises, equipment upgrades disguised as maintenance, personnel transfers that happen to strengthen key positions. We prepare for war while officially maintaining peace." Admiral Chen stared at her for a long moment, seeing not a 12-year-old girl but a strategic mind that had already saved humanity once. The decision he faced would define his career and possibly the future of human civilization. Outside his office window, the lights of New Geneva sparkled in the afternoon sun, a city rebuilt after alien invasion. Somewhere beyond those lights, among the stars that had once seemed so distant, new threats were already moving toward humanity's expanding frontier. The war hero was about to become something more dangerous, a revolutionary. 6 months later, Sarah stood in a hidden facility beneath the Martian surface, surrounded by the most capable military minds humanity had produced. What had started as secret meetings with Admiral Chen had evolved into something unprecedented, an underground network of officers who believed in preparing for threats the official government refused to acknowledge. "Vega, signals have intensified," reported Commander Lisa Park, formerly of the Outer Rim Patrol Fleet. "Intelligence suggests a massive fleet movement toward human space. Estimated arrival in 8 months." The room buzzed with tension. Around the curved table sat 12 officers who had risked their careers to join Sarah's shadow organization. They called themselves the Preparedness Initiative, though outsiders who discovered their existence used less flattering terms. The media labeled them Chen's conspiracy, painting Sarah as a traumatized child manipulating well-meaning adults. "Official channels are still treating this as natural phenomena," added Captain Rodriguez, his weathered face grim. "The Colonial Defense Committee refuses to acknowledge any military threat. They're calling our intelligence reports war fever and recommending psychological evaluation for anyone who supports military preparation." Sarah absorbed the information with the calm focus that had made her legendary. At 13, she had grown taller, but retained the intensity that made seasoned officers defer to her judgment. The military academy had taught her theory, but her underground network had given her something more valuable. Loyal followers who understood that sometimes saving humanity required breaking rules. "Show me the defensive positions," Sarah commanded, and the room's holographic displays activated. A 3-dimensional map of human space appeared, showing colonies, patrol routes, and defensive installations. Red markers indicated vulnerabilities that Sarah's analysis had identified months earlier. The sight was exactly as terrifying as she had predicted. Humanity's expansion had prioritized growth over security, spreading colonial settlements across dozens of systems without adequate protection. The official military followed outdated protocols designed for threats like the Zephyrians, but the Vega signals suggested enemies far more sophisticated. We've managed to upgrade 17 orbital platforms using training exercise authorizations, Admiral Chen reported. Captain Williams has repositioned 3 patrol fleets under the guise of routine deployments. We've also established emergency supply caches at these locations. New markers appeared on the display, showing the network's secret preparations. Sarah studied the improvements with mixed feelings. Her underground organization had accomplished more in 6 months than the official military had achieved in 2 years of committee meetings. But it wasn't enough. The preparations were scattered and insufficient against the threat building beyond human space. We need faster ships, Sarah said, highlighting vulnerability zones on the display. Current patrol vessels can't respond quickly enough to coordinate attacks. And we need better intelligence gathering. We're still guessing about enemy capabilities based on signal analysis. Lieutenant Commander Sarah Kim, the network's intelligence specialist, cleared her throat nervously. I've been developing contacts in the Deep Space Monitoring Service. There are people willing to share classified information, but they're taking enormous risks. If we're discovered, the unspoken consequences hung in the air. Military officers who participated in unauthorized operations faced court-martial, imprisonment, and career destruction. For Sarah, the consequences might be even worse. The government that celebrated her as a war hero would not hesitate to declare her mentally unstable if her activities threatened political stability. I've been thinking about that, Sarah said quietly. Maybe it's time to stop hiding. The room erupted in concerned voices. Admiral Chen raised his hand for silence. Explain. Sarah stood and walked to the holographic display, her young figure dwarfed by the vast map of human space. We're operating in secret because we're afraid of political consequences. But politics won't matter when alien fleets arrive. Maybe we need to force the issue into the open. A public revelation would destroy us, Captain Rodriguez protested. The media would crucify anyone associated with unauthorized military operations. Only if we fail, Sarah replied. But if we're right about the threat, if the attack comes as predicted, then our preparations will save lives. Success justifies everything. Commander Park leaned forward. You're talking about treason, Sarah. Openly defying government authority. I'm talking about survival, Sarah corrected. The same government that celebrates me as a hero refuses to listen when I warn them about new threats. They want the symbol of victory without accepting the reality of ongoing danger. The debate that followed lasted hours. These were career military officers trained to follow orders and respect authority. Sarah was asking them to choose between institutional loyalty and human survival. For many, the decision went against everything they had been taught. But as the night progressed, reports continued arriving that supported Sarah's analysis. Deep space sensors detected massive energy signatures moving toward human space. Communication relays went silent in outer systems. The evidence was overwhelming, but official channels continued denying any military significance. If we do this, Admiral Chen said finally, there's no going back. We'll be branded as traitors, conspirators, or worse. Our careers, our reputations, everything will be destroyed. Sarah nodded. I lost my childhood to save humanity from the Zephyrians. You might lose your careers to save humanity from whatever's coming next. The question is, what's more important, our personal futures or human survival? The vote was unanimous. Within hours, the Preparedness Initiative would transition from shadow organization to open rebellion. They would release their intelligence publicly, reveal the government's inadequate response, and force humanity to confront the truth about threats gathering in the darkness between stars. As the meeting concluded, Sarah remained behind in the empty command center. The holographic display still showed human space, vulnerable colonies scattered like bright targets against the cosmic dark. Somewhere beyond the edge of that map, alien forces were already moving. The war that had shaped her childhood was ending. But the war that would define her adolescence was about to begin. The girl who had conquered battlefields before puberty was about to discover that the most difficult enemy wasn't aliens or bureaucrats. It was the human tendency to ignore uncomfortable truths until survival demanded acknowledgement. Sometimes saving humanity meant fighting humanity itself. Tomorrow, Sarah Chen would become the most wanted person in human space. Tonight she was still just a 13-year-old girl carrying the weight of species survival on shoulders that had never known the luxury of innocence. The news broke simultaneously across every major communication network in human space. At 0800 Standard Time, while the Colonial Defense Committee was conducting their weekly meeting about budget allocations, classified intelligence data flooded civilian media channels. The transmission was untraceable, professionally packaged, and utterly devastating to the official narrative of peaceful expansion. Sarah watched the coverage from a hidden facility on Europa, knowing that her life as she knew it was ending. News anchors struggled to comprehend the information streaming across their screens. Alien fleets moving toward human space, government cover-ups, and military preparations conducted in secret by a teenage girl and her network of rogue officers. "This is unprecedented," declared Marcus Webb of the Interplanetary News Service. "Intelligence reports suggest an alien threat of massive proportions, comparable to or exceeding the Zephyrian invasion. Yet government sources have been denying any danger for months, dismissing these warnings as the product of childhood trauma and military paranoia." The reaction was immediate and explosive. Communication networks crashed under the volume of traffic as billions of humans across dozens of worlds tried to access the leaked information. Emergency sessions of the Colonial Assembly were called. Stock markets plummeted as investors realized the implications of another interstellar war. Within hours, arrest warrants were issued for Sarah and every member of her organization. The charges were severe: treason, unauthorized disclosure of classified information, conspiracy to undermine government authority. But the warrants were largely symbolic. Sarah's network had anticipated this response and disappeared into hiding weeks earlier. From her command center on Europa, Sarah monitored the chaos with mixed emotions. The truth was finally in the open, but the cost was higher than she had hoped. Admiral Chen's military career was destroyed. Commander Park faced criminal prosecution. Captain Rodriguez had been arrested trying to reach his family on Mars. These people had sacrificed everything to support her vision of human survival. "Public opinion is shifting," reported Lieutenant Kim, monitoring social media and news coverage. "Initial shock is giving way to anger. People are demanding answers about why the government ignored these warnings." Sarah nodded, studying the flood of information scrolling across her screens. Humanity's reaction was following predictable patterns: denial, anger, bargaining, depression, acceptance. The question was whether they could reach acceptance before the alien fleets arrived. The government's response was equally predictable. President Morrison appeared on emergency broadcasts, denouncing the leaks as reckless fear-mongering by a disturbed child and her deluded followers. He assured the public that official intelligence had found no credible threats, painting Sarah as a traumatized war veteran unable to adjust to peacetime. "Sarah Chen is a hero," Morrison said, his expression conveying paternal concern. "But heroes can be wounded by their experiences. The military recognizes signs of combat stress disorder, and we believe Ms. Chen's recent actions reflect psychological trauma rather than rational assessment of actual threats." The strategy was clever: acknowledge Sarah's heroic status while undermining her credibility. By framing her actions as symptoms of mental illness, the government could dismiss her warnings without directly attacking her reputation. It was the kind of political maneuvering that Sarah had learned to recognize and counter. Her response came 12 hours later, broadcast from an unknown location using equipment that made tracking impossible. Sarah appeared on screens across human space, older than the war footage most people remembered, but still unmistakably the girl who had saved humanity from the Zephyrians. "My name is Sarah Chen," she began, her voice carrying the authority that had once commanded armies. 3 years ago, I helped drive alien invaders from human space. Today, I'm warning you about new invaders already moving toward our colonies." What followed was 30 minutes of devastating clarity. Sarah presented her analysis of the Vega signals, her assessment of human vulnerabilities, and documentation of the government's refusal to acknowledge mounting evidence. She named specific officials who had ignored intelligence reports, detailed the inadequate state of colonial defenses, and provided evidence of the cover-up that had prevented proper preparation. "I'm not asking you to trust me because I'm a war hero," Sarah concluded. "I'm asking you to examine the evidence for yourselves. In 6 months, maybe less, alien fleets will reach human space. When they arrive, our colonies will be defended by orbital platforms designed for pirates and asteroids, not military invasions. Millions will die because your leaders chose politics over survival. The broadcast's impact was immediate and profound. Within hours, demonstrations erupted on every major world. Colonial assemblies demanded access to classified intelligence. Military officers began resigning in protest of government policies. The careful stability that had followed the Zephyrian victory collapsed as humanity confronted the possibility of another existential threat. Sarah's parents had been killed in the first alien invasion, making her an orphan with no family to pressure or threaten. Her legal guardians were military officers who supported her actions. The government had no leverage over her except force, and using force against humanity's most famous war hero would be political suicide. As the crisis deepened, more intelligence officers came forward with supporting evidence. Deep space monitoring stations confirmed the approaching alien signatures. Colonial defense inspectors revealed the inadequate state of outer world protections. Scientists provided analysis of the Vega signals that supported Sarah's most dire predictions. The tipping point came when General Harrison, the highest-ranking officer in the Colonial Defense Force, resigned publicly and endorsed Sarah's warnings. His statement was brief but devastating. In 30 years of military service, I have never encountered a strategic mind more capable than Sarah Chen's. When she warns of danger, humanity should listen. President Morrison's administration tried to maintain their position, but the evidence had become overwhelming. Intelligence reports leaked daily, each one supporting Sarah's analysis and contradicting official denials. Public trust in government collapsed as citizens realized their leaders had prioritized political stability over species survival. On Europa, Sarah monitored the chaos she had unleashed with grim satisfaction. The truth was painful, but humanity needed to face reality before the next invasion arrived. Her network had accomplished the impossible, forcing an entire species to confront uncomfortable truths about their vulnerability among the stars. But truth was only the beginning. Now came the harder task: preparing humanity for a war that would make the Zephyrian conflict look like a minor skirmish. The aliens moving toward human space were more advanced, more numerous, and more determined than anything humanity had previously encountered. The girl who had conquered battlefields before puberty was about to face her greatest challenge yet: saving a species from extinction while hunted as a traitor by the very people she was trying to protect. Sometimes being right was the most dangerous position of all. The first alien ships emerged from hyperspace exactly where Sarah had predicted they would, 3 months ahead of her most optimistic timeline. The Kepler 452 colony detected massive energy signatures at the edge of their system, while most residents slept peacefully, unaware that their world had become the opening battlefield of humanity's second interstellar war. Sarah watched the initial reports from her new command center, hastily established aboard the battleship Independence, after President Morrison's government finally collapsed under the weight of public pressure. Her transformation from fugitive to supreme military commander had taken only 6 weeks, driven by the undeniable reality that her predictions were coming true with terrifying accuracy. Sensor data confirms 37 capital ships, approximately 2 kilometers each, reported Commander Torres, formerly of the Colonial Defense Force, now serving as Sarah's intelligence chief. Technology appears significantly advanced beyond anything in our databases. Energy output suggests weaponry capable of planetary bombardment. The command center buzzed with controlled urgency as officers processed incoming data from long-range sensors throughout human space. These weren't the insectoid Zephyrians Sarah had fought as a child. The new aliens, dubbed Hegemony, based on intercepted communication patterns, represented a technological civilization that made humanity look primitive by comparison. "Fleet composition analysis complete," announced Lieutenant Park, her voice tight with controlled fear. "The enemy formation suggests this is a reconnaissance force, not their main battle group. Intelligence estimates the full Hegemony fleet at over 300 vessels." Sarah absorbed the information with the calm focus that had made her legendary, but inside she felt the familiar weight of impossible responsibility. At 14, she had become humanity's military supreme commander, not through political appointment, but through the simple recognition that she was their best hope for survival. The irony wasn't lost on her. The girl who couldn't adjust to civilian life had found her purpose in preparing for another war. "Status report on our defensive preparations," Sarah commanded, her voice carrying authority that made veteran officers twice her age respond without hesitation. Admiral Chen, no longer hiding his association with Sarah's network, stepped forward with grim satisfaction. "The unauthorized upgrades we implemented are now officially recognized and expanded. Orbital defense platforms around major colonies have been reinforced. Emergency supply caches are established throughout human space. We have 47 combat vessels deployed in strategic positions." It wasn't enough. Sarah's analysis indicated humanity needed at least twice that number to mount an effective defense against hegemony technology, but it was infinitely better than the 12 aging patrol craft that would have represented humanity's entire space fleet if the government had maintained its peaceful policies. "Time to contact?" Sarah asked, studying the tactical displays that showed alien fleet movements with precise detail. 14 hours until they reach Kepler 452, Commander Torres reported. "Colonial evacuation is 60% complete, but we're leaving behind critical infrastructure and 3 million people who refuse to abandon their homes." Sarah had expected this. Humans rarely fled from abstract threats, preferring to trust in their ability to endure whatever came. The Kepler colonists were betting their lives that humanity's military could protect them, a bet that Sarah wasn't certain she could win. "Open a channel to all colonial defense forces," Sarah ordered. Around her, the command center fell silent as officers prepared to broadcast orders that would commit humanity to its second interstellar war. "This is Supreme Commander Chen to all human forces," Sarah began, her young voice carrying across light years to reach every military installation in human space. "Hostile alien forces have entered the Kepler system with apparent intent to attack human colonies. All defensive protocols are now active. All military personnel are authorized to engage enemy forces with extreme prejudice." The orders that followed were the product of months of planning conducted in secret while the government denied any threat existed. Sarah had learned from the Zephyrian War that successful defense required coordination across multiple star systems, rapid deployment of forces to threatened areas, and tactical flexibility to adapt to enemy capabilities. "Independence Battle Group will intercept enemy forces at Kepler 452, Sarah continued. "Titan Defense Fleet will establish secondary positions at Alpha Centauri. Mars Orbital Command will coordinate supply lines and reinforcement schedules. We are fighting for human survival. There will be no retreat, no surrender, no mercy for enemies who threaten our species." As the communication ended, Sarah found herself thinking about the strange path that had brought her to this moment. 4 years ago, she had been a 7-year-old girl playing in New Geneva while her parents worked at the Colonial Administration Center. The Zephyrian invasion had stolen her childhood, forged her into a weapon of war, then left her struggling to find purpose in a peace she couldn't understand. Now, facing a threat that made the Zephyrians look like minor pirates, Sarah finally understood her true calling. She wasn't meant for normal life, for civilian pursuits, for the peaceful existence that other humans took for granted. She was meant to stand between humanity and extinction, to make the impossible decisions that preserved human civilization among the stars. "Ma'am," Lieutenant Kim called out, monitoring communication channels. "We're receiving messages from throughout human space. Colonial militias are mobilizing, civilian vessels are volunteering for support roles, and former military personnel are requesting reinstatement. The entire species is responding to your call." Sarah nodded, feeling the weight of species survival settle on her shoulders like a familiar burden. Humanity had learned from the Zephyrian War that survival sometimes required following leaders who seemed too young, too inexperienced, too unconventional for traditional command structures. Her age no longer mattered when the alternative was extinction. "Signal the fleet," Sarah ordered. "All ships prepare for hyperspace jump to Kepler 452. We're going to show these aliens what happens when they threaten humanity." As the Independence and its escort vessels activated their hyperspace drives, Sarah stood at the command center's main display, watching human space recede behind them. Somewhere ahead lay an alien fleet with technology beyond human understanding, weapons that could destroy planets, and intentions that remained completely unknown. The girl who had conquered battlefields before puberty was about to discover whether the lessons learned fighting insectoid Invaders would apply to enemies that might be far more intelligent, far more dangerous, and far more determined to claim human space for themselves. But for the first time since the Zephyrian War ended, Sarah Chen felt completely at peace. War was terrible, but it was also the only environment where her unique abilities found their proper expression. Civilian life had broken her spirit, but the prospect of defending humanity had restored her sense of purpose. The new war was beginning, and humanity's most unconventional commander was finally where she belonged, standing between her species and the infinite darkness that surrounded their small cluster of lights in the cosmic void.